Coming up next on Mod Projects.
So as I said about this thing behind me, which was probably, by the time it was finished, one of the most modified M20s on the planet. There's a few of us in the UK building them, which essentially we added a mid-drive and various other things. But let's start about the bike that I got out of the box. So when it turned up, I was quite excited. I unpacked it, built it, and it looked kind of cool and I liked the look of it. And then I sat on it and I felt like a grown-up on a kid's bike. It was that small. And where it says on the website between 5 foot and 6'8", believe it or not, if you're over 5'10", do not buy this bike. You're going to be constantly compromising yourself to fit the bike, not the other way around. And ideally what you want to be doing if you have an e-bike is you want to fit the bike around you, not the other way around. It's one of my things with these cafe racer style bikes. But in Engwe's case, they made a short seat. So the only way you could actually fit the geometry of the bike was increase the height of the seat or extend the seat out. Well, you couldn't extend the seat out. You could a little bit, but not much, a couple of inches. And really, when you have a look at some of these things like the S73, it has a longboard saddle on that you can move yourself back on. But with the M20, you're sort of in a fixed position. So from the off, the bike was always going to be at 6 foot and 260 pound, a compromise for me. I had to compromise how the bike, how I fitted my body to the bike and not the other way around. So the first upgrade I did was the brakes because they were awful. But after a few miles on it, they were screeching already. So I swapped those out for hydraulic brakes, which invariably, if you've got one of these on a mechanical brakes on, any mechanical brake bike that weighs in it over 35 kilos, you really want to be changing the brakes out because mechanical brakes just don't do it. So I did that. After that, I realised that every time I sat on the suspension, nothing was moving. So basically the mid-suspension is a lock. It's actually a spring. So it does nothing and it's not variable for your weight. So I swapped that out and the air forks were, they weren't all air forks, but I swapped them out for air forks because the forks on the front were a bit crap. So I was able to lock the suspension out as I wanted it on the rear of the bike, which increased the height slightly, but I got a 32 inch inseam, and it didn't work for me. And I felt every time I ran out for a ride on the bike, I was riding with my hamstrings and not my quads and my calves because I couldn't extend either. So if you know anything about the geometry of a bike and how you pedal, you need to get virtually within 2 to 3 inches of a full stroke. But you couldn't get anywhere near that with this bike. And I only imagine anybody at 6'8" on this, it's got to be like Godzilla trying to ride a Ducati. It's just a ridiculous sight in my head. And from then I started to dislike the bike. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're about 5'10" down to around about 5'1", this bike's fine. Because you can fit within the geometry of that bike, but anything above 5'10", and you'll hear people say, well, I'm 6'2" and it's fine for me. It's not. You're not pedaling the bike properly. If you want to buy the bike and not pedal it, believe me, if you're over 250 pound, got 2 batteries on, so what does that make that? 26 amp hour, you're not going far. Most you're going to get out of it is about 15, 20 miles with 2 batteries. So I came up with the idea of trying to, and I'd seen another guy, Billy, who he'd done it. And I thought, if somebody else can do it, I can do it. And I did. I added a mid-drive. I added a Beifang BBS HD, 1000 watt, and running a 52 volt battery through it. And that totally changed the bike for speed. It now had torque. So I never really found an hill that struggled getting up just on the throttles alone. So I made it a bi-throttle. Reason being that I didn't really need that hub motor running all the time. So it was just sucking up battery. Which brings me on to the next thing. Engwe's reported range on this thing is ridiculous. And I don't care if you weigh 5 or 8 stone, you're still not going to get the range on whatever they say it's going to be on pass 1. So within that, the range that you are probably going to get at my weight with a 20, well, here's the first thing. When I ordered the bike, I ordered it with 2 batteries, and the second battery never turned up. After 3 months of promises, it never turned up. And this was partly what pushed me into doing the mid-drive thing. And when I added the 52 volt battery, I went big. I think it was 25 amp hours. So it gave me plenty of range, but don't believe anything Engwe ever tells you about range. It's probably going to be a big porky, one of them. So don't believe them on range. Don't believe any manufacturer on range. There aren't many out there that'll admit the true range on some of these e-bikes. I think there's a few out there that actually put a weight ratio, possible range with what battery on, and they're slightly over-egged, but they're much more accurate. So let's get on to the next thing. Like I said, batteries and range, and I was able to get, with the mid-drive on and that 25 amp hour 52 volt battery, I was able to get probably about 35 miles, and you're not using the rear hub hardly at all, so you can use that to eke out on throttle alone another 5 miles normally. So you're aiming at around about 40 miles range with me on like I say, at 260 pound. So at the end of the day, I sort of give up with it. I didn't love the bike from the off, and I was just trying to do. So this is advice out there for those of you that are thinking, "Oh, I'm going to build one." Don't. You can end up, if you're doing it just because of range, or the bike doesn't fit you, and you just think don't do it. It's expensive. I mean, you're looking at £900 for the battery and the mid-drive. You're looking at a lot of time working out how to get this to run. And then it's all the other things that you end up compromising with, which is suspension and brakes and everything else that you need, even having a bespoke saddle made. And the bike took me into about a £3,000 bracket, and there's a lot of really good bikes out there you can buy now for £3,000. So as much as you like the look of this bike, buy it, upgrade the brakes, and that's it. Don't go any further than that. Here's the breakdown. If you're between 5'2" and 5'10" and weigh around about £200, this isn't a bad bike for you. In fact, the value for money is pretty good. Swap the front brakes out and the rear brakes out for hydraulic. You're pretty much good to go. I also advise that you swap that full throttle out, because it's kind of dangerous. There's no lock off on it. I've had that bike get away from me a couple of times before I swapped it over to dumb throttles. Don't be the range that Engwe tell you. It's nowhere near that. And that's even on somebody that weighs 10 stone. I can't believe that, even on one in pedaling. But I say, if you're over 6 foot, don't buy this bike. Like I said, you'll find people out there saying, "Oh, it's a great bike, I love it. You know, I go here, there and everywhere." Oh, you can pedal on it. You can't. You're not pedaling properly. And for the amount of pedaling energy you're putting into it, for what you're getting back, it's pointless pedaling it. Like I said, the geometry is completely wrong. And it's down to that saddle. More than anything else, that's the biggest compromise on this bike, is the saddle. The saddle, it's too small. It's too low and it's too short. You're actually crushed into a position where you've got about that to sit in, when you should be having that where you can extend your bumhole all the way over the rear wheel. But the only way that Engwe could have fixed this would have had 2 frame sizes. And if they'd have done another frame that was 3 inches bigger, it would have been ideal for people over 6 foot. I mean, you could have kept the lower heights down in the original frame, and then have another one for, and they never did. I don't think the bike sold well enough for them to actually look at doing another frame. However, I say that, and I think they might be making a special version of it that's coming out. So I'm not going to quote myself as saying they're never going to do it. I think I've seen some rough drafts of it somewhere. So what would I give it out of 10? Well, for me, for a bike that cost over £3,000 in the end, let's get that out. Let's forget that bit. Just the bike itself, I'll give it a 5 out of 10, and it's mainly down to that seat. The fact that I dumped a load of money in it, it was an hobby, so I can live with that. And I actually got this YouTube channel started, really. People were interested in it. So that's it for now. I will have another couple of videos coming up on the M20 about how I did the mid-drive, if you're interested in seeing it. Any questions, pop them down into the comment section. And I know I keep saying it, but around here somewhere there's a, there it is, subscribe button. Subscribe. I mean, it don't take a few seconds and it helps me to keep this video channel going. Don't make any money. It just gives me the incentive to keep going. Anyway, have a nice day, everyone. Ciao.